Hello, and welcome to my hiking statistics and anecdotes video. Yay! I'm a bit of an Excel nerd, and I kept a detailed daily log of which I've now turned into charts and graphs. Every day on my hike, I would record my start and end time. My Garmin watch kept track of moving time, steps, etc., and anything else I wanted to record, I would make note of at the end of the day. In addition to these statistics, I've also included some interesting stories that are relevant to each section. The first graph is my accommodation on trail. On day 3, I met a woman who cowboy camped with her husband from the start all the way to the Sierra. She dispelled all of my fears, and as such, this became my preferred method of sleeping on trail, and became both addictive and a point of pride as to how long I could go without using a tent. It's also magical going to bed watching the sunset every night from my sleeping quilt. A highlight was cowboy camping throughout the Sierra, including the base camp of Forester Pass and at the top outside of Muir Hut. Not only was it stinky in the hut, but the sunset that night was breathtaking. Overall, I was 89 days cowboy camping, which was more than half of my total days, and 80% of my time sleeping outdoors on trail. Most of my 23 days tenting was either because of rain, but mostly at the end of my hike when it was super buggy and too hot to sleep in my quilt. I had to use the tent so I wouldn't get eaten alive. I stayed 39 days in hotels and motels, which is a lot, but I was editing video on trail, so I was generally 2 to 3 nights instead of 1. I trail angeled 6 times for a total of 21 nights, and half were extended stays with family and friends. A lot of the time I camped alone, not for any other reason than that's how it worked out. 60% of my nights were with 2 other people or less. 17% of my nights were with large groups of 10 or more people. I generally camped at water sources when available, and most other people have the same idea. It's frankly just easier that way. But because I wasn't traveling amongst the herd or with a tramily, which is your trail family, a lot of the time I was on my own. Of my 174 days on trail, 66 of them were in the desert. This is a big section taking me to Kennedy Meadows. I started slower and didn't hike marathons until the end of the hike. The Sierra and NorCal sections were very similar in time at 33 and 34 days respectively. Even though the Sierra is shorter distance, I wanted to hike less and enjoy the scenery more. Oregon at 22 days is much easier hiking terrain, a smaller state. I was preparing for my 24-hour challenge and hiked 87 miles in 3 days to catch up with Cheshire and BLT, my trail friends, to hike the rest of the way home with them. Washington's 19 days were because I hiked at least 25 miles per day, and also because of fire closures and reroutes, which had me end in Leavenworth. For the type of hiking day, a Nero is a near 0-mile day. I define these days for me as less than 5 hiking hours or less than 11 miles, which for us Canadians is less than 17 kilometers. In my pre-PCT hikes, 17 kilometers would have been considered a long day, but on the PCT, I considered it a Nero. A 0 is a rest day in town where I didn't hike at all. I zeroed once on trail at Deep Creek Hot Springs, but that was it. Overall, I had 109 full hiking days, 21 Neros, and 44 zeros. The zeros had to be a record, or at least a contender. Again, a lot of these were for editing, but it's still a lot. They probably were a big factor in me not getting injured because I could rest in town. For miles per day, I broke them into full hiking days and Neros. My Neros were pretty consistent throughout each section, between 7 and 8 miles per day. For full hiking days, the numbers tell a story. I started slower in the desert and got used to the daily routine, averaging 16 miles per day. It sounds like a big number at first, but the terrain isn't as technical as it is at home on Vancouver Island. I slowed down in the Sierra, and the terrain is the most difficult, climbing up and down all the passes, averaging 14 miles per day. Once you've hiked the desert and the Sierra, you're basically a hiking machine, so the mileage goes up in NorCal to 20 miles per day. I also night hiked a bunch to avoid the heat. Oregon is the easiest terrain, and I start trying to outpace potential fire closures. Plus, I was starting to hit 30s on some days, so my average was 24 miles per day. Overall, I had short days, long days, marathon-a-day stretches, a 24-hour challenge, and everything in between. Over the entire hike, I averaged 18 miles per day. Not too shabby for my first PCT run. I was a slow hiker when I started in the desert. I came off the couch, was in my late 40s, and made peace with the fact that I was being passed by everyone. Not surprisingly, I hiked faster on Neros than on full days. It's also not surprising I hiked at 1.4 miles per hour in the Sierra. I was climbing mountains and enjoying the scenery. I remember coming into Mammoth barely able to walk. I was so exhausted after a 7-day stretch. I slept and recuperated for 3 days. However, once I came out of the Sierra Nevada, I was transformed into a typical powerful PCT hiker. I night hiked in NorCal to avoid the heat waves during the day. Night hiking slowed me down, but not always. I remember crushing the Shasta climb at night at 3 miles per hour uphill. I could not believe it at the time. Even better, I had hiked 22 miles already that day before resting in the river to start the night climb. In Oregon, I did all the passing and averaged 3.6 miles per hour through the state. Overall, I averaged 2 miles per hour for the whole hike, start to finish, which is 3.2 kilometers an hour for us Canadians. Not too shabby for someone whose longest hike pre-PCT was 205 kilometers. My hiking time per day was reasonably consistent throughout each section after the desert, which was intentionally less. I hiked 7.5 hours a day, rested for 3. It sounds like a lot of rest, but there are many factors. It's easy to rest for an hour for each meal. I often hiked after supper, and there's lots of cool things to stop and look at. So overall, I felt it was a well-balanced day. Hike, eat, sleep, repeat. That's the mantra. 10.5 to 11 hours per day, every day. Most of my statistics came from my Garmin watch. Over the 6-month hike, I accumulated 5 million steps, averaging 32,062 per day. I started in the desert at 29,000 steps per day, and by the time I hit Oregon, I was stepping 40,000 per day. As a thru hiker, you are easily a top 1% stepper in the world. Trail expenses. I will start by saying mine are no means representative of a typical thru hike. My career was generous to me, and I had the luxury of time and money for this hike. Most of my expenses went to accommodation and restaurants in town, which is typical. As I said previously, editing my videos in town extended my stay, which extended my expenses. This also contributed to me not hiking with a tramily. Most people would stay one night in town and so would move on before me. This didn't bother me. Everyone hikes their own hike. So restaurants and hotels were 58% of my expenses, or $12,000. Trail food, 21% at $4,200 US. I added and replaced the odd piece of gear, and 12% was everything else. Which, when you put it all together, I spent $21,000 US over 6 months. I weighed myself and took measurements on March 10th, and I was 205 pounds when I started. By September 16th, I was 183 pounds. I had lost 22 pounds and converted a lot of fat to muscle. I lost 1 inch in my chest, 4 inches in my waist, and 1.5 inches in my hips. I started hiking wearing Brooks Cascadia shoes, which were lightweight but couldn't stand up to the rigors of the Rocky Desert. After 280 miles, I switched to Morel Moabs and used 5 pairs of these over the rest of the hike. Overall, 6 pairs of shoes in total. The Morels are what I wear in my normal daily life, so I knew I would have no problems with them. I never really dealt with blisters except for my 24-hour challenge. Since I generally stayed in a motel when in town, I usually had a shower every 4 to 5 days. If there weren't laundry facilities, I would wash my clothes in sinks and showers whenever needed. I would wash my socks in creeks while on trail to keep them clean more frequently. The longest stretch without laundry or shower was 11 days after Ashland. Luckily, I wasn't generally too stinky because of my merino clothing. However, I definitely had salt stains on my clothing constantly, just like in this picture. The dirtiest I was while going through one of the giant burn areas for a few weeks. I was black and gray for days on end. Over the course of my hike, I did 32 food resupplies. These were generally at grocery stores whenever possible, but sometimes they were a gas station, a convenience store, or a hiking supplies store. Most of these were in person, but I also mailed some forward to myself, including all of Washington. Luckily, I never had mailed food go missing or arrive late. I generally resupplied every 4.5 days. With the Sierra being the longest stretch between resupplies, I had an 8-day as well as a 7-day. I also had 7-day stretch once in Northern California and Oregon. My shortest stretch between resupply was 2 and 3 days, which were awesome because your pack is so light. Over the course of my hike, I drank 640 liters of water, averaging 5.5 liters per day. The anomaly was in NorCal, where I averaged 7 liters a day due to the heat. In fact, at the peak of the heat wave, I drank 13 liters in one day and 44 liters over 4 days. Trail magic is where random people go out of their way to help out hikers. It's generally food or drinks, but can be anything. I came across fruit in coolers in random places, entire 3-course hot breakfasts being cooked for you more than once, ice cold pop and beer, ice cream bars, you name it. It's unexpected and always awesome. Some of the weirder items included travel-sized Tylenol, marijuana, and device charging stands. My favorite was at a lake where a family was camping for the weekend. They had music, reclining lawn chairs, burgers, potato salad, coleslaw, a margarita station, beer and coolers, pop, a kayak to use on the lake, and more. It was unbelievable how much they had gone out of their way for us hikers. Getting hitches to town is a fact of life on the PCT, and I had wonderful hitching karma. I rarely had to wait longer than 15 minutes. I hitched 17 times, with my fastest time to get picked up being 30 seconds, and this was in the middle of nowhere in the desert, and they stopped to ask me if I was a PCT hiker and needed a ride. In that same spot, a friend of mine attempted 5 Ubers, 4 of which canceled after getting towards the area because it was so remote they thought it was fake. She pleaded with the 5th Uber not to cancel, and after 6 hours, finally got picked up. Another memorable hitch was coming down Sonora Pass where this picture was taken. People there had been trying without success for over half an hour. Cheshire and I thought we should try because our hitching karma was so good. We took 2 steps onto the side of the road and immediately got picked up. I once got cocky and made a bet with another hiker I just met that a particular car was going to pick us up. She said, "No, it's going in the wrong direction." The car U-turned on the highway, drove up the hill where we were, and asked us if we needed a ride. All I could say to her was, "Booyah." My hardest hitch was my last one at White Pass. Fire had closed the highway, and we were at the end of the line at a ski hill that was closed. It took 3 hours and a day hiker finishing their hike to get lucky and take me to Leavenworth. My sketchiest hitch was my first, with a guy who cracked a beer as soon as he started driving and swore every third word for 20 minutes straight. These last 2 images are excerpts from my hiking log. The first one is where I kept track of my expenses, and the second one is the daily statistics that I kept, which were used to make this video. And that's it. That's all my statistics and the interesting, memorable stories that came with them. Take care.